Hello, I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome to World Have Your Say. It's a programme devoted to your opinions and your experiences. And this time every week, we're going to be live here on BBC World News. And of course, the subject that you're all talking about today is the situation in Egypt. In Tahrir Square, as I talk, thousands of people are demanding that their president leave today. They're calling it the day of departure. Elsewhere in Cairo, there are other crowds calling it a day of allegiance and saying the president should stay on. And the man himself, Hosni Mubarak, in an interview yesterday, very much gave the impression that he views this as business as usual. He plans on being in the presidential palace for some while longer. But what about those of you watching BBC World News? Do you think he should go now or should be given more time to organise a transition? If you're online, you can get in touch on Twitter, Facebook and on our blog. You're welcome to phone up. You can text us as well and get in touch through Skype. And wherever you're watching, we're live and you're very welcome to take part. And we're going to be speaking to some of you in Tunis, in Cairo and in London in the next few minutes about when President Mubarak should leave office. If those of you watching would like to take part online as well, if you go to our Facebook page, click the like button when you get there and you can get involved. But let's begin World Have Your Say with a look at the day's main developments in this story. Huge crowds of Egyptians have gathered in central Cairo once again to call for the resignation of President Hosni Mubarak. In Tahrir, or Liberation Square, the protesters have been chanting, waving flags and singing patriotic songs as thousands more continue to join them. Pro-Mubarak supporters have been stopped from entering Tahrir Square by the army, so they're gathering in other squares in Cairo. They're calling it a day of allegiance. The president says there will be chaos if he does step down. And the protests against President Mubarak today haven't been confined to Cairo. There have also been tens of thousands of demonstrators in the port city of Alexandria. Meanwhile, in Jordan, more than 1,000 people have demonstrated in the capital, Amman, to call for political reforms in the country. The protesters, led by the opposition group, the Islamic Action Front, gathered outside the Prime Minister's offices to demand changes to the country's electoral laws. And in Iran, the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has called the uprising in Egypt a sign of Islamic awareness in the region. He described President Mubarak as a servant of Israel and of America. We're going to speak to guests in Tunis and also in London. But first of all, let's go to Cairo. We can speak to Shahira Amin, who until very, very recently was a journalist on the state-run television channel Nile TV. She doesn't work there any longer. Shahira, welcome to World Have Your Say. Tell us why you've left your job.
I left my job because I found that I couldn't be part of these very exciting and important events happening in my country. As an Egyptian journalist, I had the right to be in Tahrir Square covering these very important developments. But in the first few days of the developments, Egypt television, we were asked not to cover what was happening in Tahrir Square, and the focus instead was on the pro-Mubarak rallies. And I felt that we were giving our viewers a distorted picture of what was taking place in the country, and that's why I decided to quit.
So you've quit your job. Now that you're free to speak your mind, when do you think your president should leave his job?
Right now, there's a stalemate and with no sign of a breakthrough in sight for some time. This looks like the situation will drag on for some time. We heard President Mubarak say that he will not leave office for fear of creating chaos. But we already have a very chaotic situation on the ground. And the anti-regime protesters in Tahrir Square appear very defiant. They're adamant to stay there until the president steps down.
I apologise for interrupting you. I'm just curious what your opinion is. Do you think it's in your country's interest that the president leaves power right away?
Initially, I thought it was best if he had stepped down right from the start. But now I'm not sure that even that will satisfy them. The situation is getting more complicated with every passing day. As you know, the country has come to a standstill. Banks and stores remain closed, and food and fuel supplies are running thin. So everybody's suffering from what's happening now, and I just hope that the situation will be resolved very soon, although
it's
I'm not
interesting
optimistic.
That what you're saying echoes a great many comments coming into the BBC. People saying the president's warning us about chaos, but we've got chaos already, so that's not a reason for him not to leave power. You're in Cairo, Shahira. It's very good for you to come onto the programme. Let's bring in Douglas Murray, Director of the Centre for Social Cohesion in London. Douglas, good to have you back on World Have Your Say. Do you agree with Shahira?
Well, the situation is obviously very complex, and when people say that there's already chaos, I think we have to remember that in these situations it can get a lot more chaotic. And I think that the protesters in the centre of Cairo and elsewhere in Egypt are obviously going to be worried that there'll be a loss of momentum unless Mubarak steps down immediately. But certainly the September timeline is a very long way away, arguably too long. But some kind of process of transition has to be made clear by the Mubarak regime, really, to give, first of all, the protesters a sense that their protest so far has not been by any means in vain, and also a sense of stability for the country, which at this point will very much need it. Regimes, when they go and step down straight away, can often lead to situations even more chaotic than those we've seen in Cairo. And for the sake of all people in Egypt, one would hope that it could be as peaceful a process as possible.
OK, so you're offering a third way, really, not September, but not now. Shahira, can you see the logic of that?
I totally agree. I think we need some kind of compromise solution and perhaps a midway. But we need to have a roadmap with very specific timelines. If President Mubarak can give a time frame for constitutional changes, for the dissolution of Parliament, perhaps that will satisfy the activists.
Shahira, you're in Cairo, Douglas is in London, and wherever you're watching BBC World News, you'll see all these images and various messages popping up on the screen as we talk. If you're online and want to get involved in that discussion, all the contact details for Twitter, Facebook and the blog are scrolling along the screen throughout the programme. So do get involved online if you can get on the net. Let's move across to Tunis and bring in Armel, who is also joining us live here on BBC World News. Armel, arguably your country started this process. Do you think it should end with President Mubarak leaving office today?
Well, I mean, I'm not in a place to really answer that question. But I think that indeed the Egyptian government has to listen to what's being shouted out on the streets, what's happening, and the violence with which the crowds have been treated is absolutely unacceptable. So if that means that he has to step down, well, yes, I think he should, yes.
And Shahira, there's been a great deal of debate about who was behind that violence, and the president said it had nothing to do with him over the past 48, 72 hours. Are you convinced by his denial?
Obviously, these are Mubarak supporters, and we don't really know who is behind them. Some of the people who were caught by the crowd turned out to have, or were reported to have, police IDs on them. Others admitted to having been hired and paid to do their job. So it seems to be a mix of police in plain clothes, but also hired thugs, the same crowd that we saw at the elections, at the legislative elections, the same bullies who were out there on the day of the election. So it really is things are getting out of hand and with no end in sight, as I said earlier.
And it's worth adding to those of you watching, if you're wondering why there hasn't been so much violence today, well, there are a number of reasons, but one of them is that the army sealed off Tahrir Square and didn't let supporters of the president in. So they said Tahrir Square is for those opposing the president, and others who would like to support the president can go to other places in the city, which is what's happened. Well, Shahira in Cairo, Douglas in London, Armel in Tunisia, do stay with us. But let's bring in one of my colleagues, because people across the Arab world are clearly talking especially about events in Egypt and what they mean for the region. And our sister show, Talking Point, is live at the moment on BBC Arabic television. Let's join Hazem Abouatfar to find out what's being said. Hazem, give us an idea of the tone of your debate.
Ross, actually a huge part of what we get here on BBC Arabic Online and on our pages on Facebook is those who are in favor of the demonstrations in Tahrir Square and those who are actually calling for the President Mubarak to step down now. Despite that, there is some people asking for these demonstrators to go home and to go back to the normal life of Egyptians. Some people asking for those to finish so they can go to work, they can have money to eat and to sustain their lives, and they can as well have some normal life, back to normal. Somebody wants to go to the hospitals. A lot of people are asking for this. Some of them not necessarily agreeing with what President Mubarak is doing, but they want to get on going with their daily lives. And we had like a poll that we asked people, what do you think is the solution of this situation in Cairo? Is it for Hosni Mubarak to stay in power or to step down now? Of course, stay in power till his presidency finishes in September. And 62 people said that he should step down now, and 38% said he should stay till the end of his presidency.
And Hazem, I know you're very busy because you're on air right now, but you broadcast across the region. Do you sense an appetite from your viewers outside of Egypt that they want some of the change which has come to Tunisia and which is coming to Egypt as well?
Yes, actually, it's very interesting that it feels online that there are some kind of campaign that is actually arranging that they are saying that after we finish with Egypt, we started with Tunisia, we are in Egypt now. The moment we finish, we're gonna move to Syria. So, and then they said maybe Yemen first. So it feels that on Facebook especially, some groups are asking for the change to come to different countries. And the contributions, because you know the internet was dead in Egypt in the last 2 days. When they put it back, a lot of people are contributing from inside Egypt, asking for people in the Arab countries to actually come to the streets and help the Egyptian as well.
Hazem, many thanks for joining us. And if you would like to get involved in the discussion in Arabic, do go to bbcarabic.com. I'm sure Douglas will want to respond to some of the things Hazem has been hearing from his viewers. But for the moment, do stay with us here on World Have Your Say. You're watching World Have Your Say, and as you can imagine, the most discussed issue around the world today is when President Mubarak should leave. We have a number of guests around the world talking about this, and wherever you're watching BBC World News, you can get involved online as well. Do you see the contact details scrolling along the bottom of the picture? In Cairo, we have Shahira Amin, till very recently a journalist with the state-owned Nile Television. She resigned this week because she wasn't happy about being told how to report the story. In Washington, D.C., we're joined by Yasser El-Shimi, a Middle East analyst and until recently an employee of the Egyptian Foreign Ministry. He's also resigned recently. He's based in Washington, D.C. Because he's unhappy about what's been happening in Tahrir Square. And last but certainly not least, Douglas Murray from the Centre for Social Cohesion in London is with us as well. And just before the break, Douglas, we heard from Hazem from BBC Arabic telling us about an appetite around the region for change. Does that excite you or does it concern you?
Well, it's enormously exciting, but we should, I think, perhaps also pick up the comment one of your communicators from Chile there, Carmen, said, is Egypt ready for democracy? I just wanted to mention this because we've always heard this. Before the Berlin Wall came down, people used to say, are the Eastern Europeans really ready for democracy? People used to say it about South America. In recent years, they've been saying it across the Middle East. Are they really ready for democracy? The evidence from recent days and weeks in Egypt and many other countries is yes, yes, yes. They are ready for democracy. But the question now has to be that the institutions of state are in place. The institutions
but Douglas,
like the army.
There are concerns. Sorry to interrupt you. There are concerns. Here's a message from Edward in Malawi saying, well, the Muslim Brotherhood could get in and they aren't interested in democracy in the long run.
Absolutely. One of the things that has to be done in the new Egypt is to ensure that any party that, like the Muslim Brotherhood, intends to have one vote once for the Egyptian people is not part of the process. This is what the Muslim Brotherhood's offshoot Hamas did in the Gaza, one election once for the people of the Gaza. And that isn't what the people of Egypt, in my understanding, have been out on the streets demonstrating for in recent days.
Okay, so
they have
that's
been for democracy, for accountability from government.
That's your concern. You end up with one election and then no more. Yasser in Washington, D.C., what's your view of this?
I think that's misreading history a little bit. I think that the example of Hamas in Gaza and the example of even the FLM in Algeria in 1992 are all examples of Islamist groups that are vying in an open democratic process for office, and once they get into office, the international community does not actually allow them to govern, and that they are forced into the current state in which they are right now.
Shahira, sorry to interrupt you there. Shahira in Cairo, I'll also give you a chance to respond to this, but I can see that Bassem in Cairo is joining us on the phone, and let's cross to him while the line's good. Bassem, tell us where you are in Egypt and also whether you'd like your president to go.
Okay, so I'm not in Tahrir Square. I'm not protesting. I'm confident in the current phase. Let's say I'm not for Mubarak. I'm for a smooth transition, and I trust the current vice president and the prime minister for this rule.
Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. We appreciate it. Let's bring in Ashraf, who's also on the phone from Egypt. Ashraf, tell us where you are and your view of when your president should go.
So let me tell you shortly and briefly that I'm living in Hurghada, and I'm saying that the president has to leave, but respectfully in a very nice way. And as well, the regime has to be out because we have to cut long story short. There is steps has to be done according to constitution, and it's clear, and everybody knows it. And they are just trying to turn around here and there, but the president has to leave, and the regime has to leave because these people are behaving like owners. They are not ruling the country, or they have a job to do. No. These people are really owning the country. So we need to move from this situation to a democratic situation.
And I suppose the question, Ashraf, is you say we need to move from this situation to a democratic situation. The vast majority of people getting in touch with BBC News agree with that. What they don't agree on is how fast that transition should progress. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. We appreciate it. Let's bring in Armel into our conversation before we go back to Shahira in Cairo. Armel, you're in Tunisia. Arguably, your country started this process. When you hear our colleagues at BBC Arabic telling you that there are thousands of people across the region excited about the idea of change, do you also feel excited by that?
Oh yes, absolutely. In fact, there have been demonstrations in Tunisia, all across Tunisia. Obviously not as impressed, but there are a few hundred people today in Tunis in front of the embassy of the Egyptian embassy in Tunis. So yes, obviously, I mean we're all very concerned about what's going on in Egypt. We're also very hopeful that they'll be able to choose the President Mubarak.
But it's interesting, Armo, that you say obviously. Shahira in Cairo, I wonder, is it obvious that change, democratic change at fast pace is good for the Middle East? Because some people are emailing saying, hold on, if you just get one election, an Islamist party wins and then the elections stop, that's not progress at all.
Let me first of all say that there's a huge appetite for change in Egypt. From what we've seen, people are ready for change. They desire democracy. They yearn for democracy, I should say. And the thing is, it's not just Western countries and the international community and Israel that are very concerned about whether the outlawed
And I'm going to jump
Muslim
in here,
Brotherhood.
Shahira, just because we're coming up to the end of the programme. But if you are watching and thinking, let's carry on this conversation, well, we can do that on BBC World Service Radio in 2 hours' time. Thanks very much for your company on World Have Your Say, and I'll speak to you next week on BBC World News.